Hi, welcome to Let's Talk Careers. I'm your host, Lisa Bauman. Today we'll be talking with Laura Black, who is the Student Rights and Responsibilities Coordinator here at Conestoga College. I was really intrigued by her story. She talked about career as a process, and I really find it fascinating how she was able to reflect on a particular skill that then became a pivotal moment in her career journey. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome, Laura. I'm so glad that you were able to come out today. Happy New Year. We're filming on the second week in January still. Yeah. I am going to get you to start with introducing yourself, and we're going to do it in kind of a unique way because we model this with our students. And it's what I call the James Bond style elevator pitch. Okay. So I'm sure you know James Bond. He always is like, Bond, James Bond. But we're not going to do it sort of the backwards way. We're just going to do first name and then a pause and then first name again and then your last name. And then feel free to, say your current role, something you're passionate about, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome. Well, I'm Laura Black, and I go by she, they, and I work in student rights and responsibilities at Conestoga College and have been there for a few years now. And something I'm passionate about. I love horses, and specifically how horses can be used in so many ways, specifically like equine therapy or for equestrian or just as home, at your own home. So I feel like they're magical beings and something creative about that.
That's very interesting. Let's start with your sort of first paid job, either as a young person or graduation, or even when you were growing up, what did you want to be?
Great questions. Growing up, what I wanted to be was a zoologist.
Okay.
I wanted to travel the world and be the next Jane Goodall. I wanted to live with monkeys in the trees and study and watch and observe and learn from them. And that was and then use that knowledge and wisdom in some way to benefit others and mobilize it. So that was actually what I wanted to do for a long time. And I come from a very large family. And so the hesitation of that was always, but how could I leave them? If I was going to uproot myself and go be with another family for that period of time, the family of monkeys or whatever, then how could I get the grounding that my family provides me? So that was always a thought. And then my first job, I lived rurally at that time. And so it ended up being working at a baseball diamond. Okay. I got paid to do the field. So I would put all the lines, the white lines and chalk across the field. And then I would work at the station, the snack station. Nice. And I would make coffee for people, which is really funny because I've never had a cup of coffee in my life. So
how old were you then?
I was probably 13 at the time.
Wow. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. And then I would pay the umpires. So they trusted me enough with money at that time too. Yeah. And then I'd count all the money up and make sure that it was even and do budgeting. And pretty fascinating.
Lots of really entry-level skills complex entry-level skills being done there.
Yeah.
So then what happened after that? So you're 13 and then what happens?
Babysat, saved all my money that way. And then I moved back to the city. And that was my first, I would say, more official job in that I worked at Westmount Private Golf Course and I was doing maintenance there and realized that early mornings are not my thing. So I always knew that, but definitely found that out when I was wanting to nap by 9 a.m. because I'd already been there for a few hours. So that wasn't the greatest fit, but it got me through. And then I moved on to working in a doctor's office, actually, for a ear, nose, and throat specialist and a speech pathologist.
Wow.
And that was very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did that all through university.
Okay.
As a nice job complementary to what I was doing in school.
So then after university, where did you go and what did you do in university and what did you?
I went to University of Waterloo.
Okay.
I took social development studies.
Yep.
I love the program, highly, highly recommend it. What it did was helped me get a variety of insights and layer those. I'm very much about integration. So the idea of taking psychology, sociology, anthropology, all those things, and education, and layering them together and saying I can look at the micro and the macro at the same time. It was a great program for that. And so I did that and did a lot of volunteering on this side, and then graduated and then moved straight into Conestoga College.
Okay. So what was your first position at Conestoga?
Well, I talked about how I used to do finances at 13.
Yes.
So my first role was financial advisor, actually, in the financial aid department.
Okay. And how long have you been with the college?
12 years.
Okay, so we're similar then. I'm there a long time as well.
Yes.
So tell me about that journey at the college. You start out in finance, with financial aid. How long were you there for?
Yeah, I started in financial aid right after a strike, actually. So it was a very interesting time to come in. And it was also a massive, we were going through a huge period of growth. So I think OSAP applications were something like up 200 and some % or something that year. And so what was interesting is in that position, everything went directly towards my personal email. So it was like Laura Black at Conestoga. And we had at that time, 6 campuses or something like that. And so I would field everything. And I would spend 3 hours a night going through voicemails on my phone, just taking them off, recording, tracking them, and then following up the next day. They would cut them off at 100 voicemails on my phone. Because literally we could not keep up with it.
Wow.
Now they have about 5 people on the front line doing that role, which is fabulous. And they've turned to a whole technology Kunomi system. So it's great to watch the growth in 12 years. But at the time, it just wasn't sustainable for me. And there was an opening in the student engagement area, student life area. And I got tapped and it was like, this is very much your leadership development background would be a great fit for this. And had a lot of support from my manager and people at the time. And it just was a natural transition over to student life, where I coordinated the Respect campaign at the college for a few years.
I think that's maybe where we kind of interacted because I was in the Learning Commons and you were in student life then.
Yes.
Yeah, at that time. Right.
Yeah. And we did some, some workshops or kind of working through some leadership stuff together. And that was the blessing of that role too, is I really got to know all levels of the college and interact with so many people from across the college, not just incoming students.
Right, because you were taking the Respect campaign to classrooms, right?
Yes, we were doing events, we were doing workshops. I would do probably about 75 workshops a year. I was overseeing about 100 volunteers, and they would go out and help us host various events, and it was student-led. And then I would supervise probably about 5 student staff members at the same time. Yeah.
So then where did you go from there?
So the great thing about the Respect campaign is I was so passionate about what it meant and what it represents, that welcoming, inclusive environment, culture, and the idea that equity needs to be built into our systems, and it has to be something that we're regularly promoting and living and embodying. And what I felt like was that there was some more work to be done in regards to our systems. And so I would talk about that. And meanwhile, there were other people also talking about it. And then the vice president at the time came up to me and said, I'd like to second you into a role where we actually research and develop what could be done in regards to expanding and building upon the Respect campaign.
Okay.
Because when you reach 10 years with a campaign, it's no longer a campaign.
Right.
And so how are we embedding that for both students and employees? And I think there was a bit of succession planning going on. So the idea of at that time, student conduct all went directly to the VP's office. And so how do we make things more manageable, more sustainable, and manage conflict at a more, because that's really what Respect is about, is navigating conflict in meaningful ways and learning and growing from it. And being respectful when there's difference, being respectful when you don't agree or don't understand where someone's coming from. How do we navigate all of that? And so what would that look like? And so that's what I did. I went into a position not knowing what was going to happen. And we researched, developed, met with people from all over the college, outside the college, looked at other models, and then presented a report that basically led to the office I'm in now in creating student rights and responsibilities.
Yeah, I was going to say, why don't you say, so was the position, when you sort of got seconded into it, was the position named, or did you kind of create that name along the way?
We created it along the way. Yeah, there was no, I was kind of brought on as a project lead, I would say, at that time, not knowing what that project would lead to. And that's how I've always lived my life, as you can tell. It's been very process-led, and I love that. I love going to the school and being like, I'm going to take some courses and see where it leads me. And that's how this felt. It led with values first, and then we saw what the college needed.
So it became the development of the Student Rights and Responsibilities Office.
Yes.
Yeah. So what does that sort of department look like now? Like it grew, right? It's kind of it solved a problem by directing students from the VP's office to your team or to this new area.
Yep. And created a frontline service rather than something kind of tucked behind doors or harder to access.
Right.
For everybody involved.
Yeah.
And that service at the time was handling any type of conflict or challenge across the college. So any student concern, any appeal that was coming through, the blessing of it all now is because of that, there's all these things that have developed since. So we now have a sexual violence person and office and policy. We now have student success advising, and those advising teams can work with the academic areas on things like appeals and navigating day-to-day conflicts and really helping with that informal resolution. And we developed a policy and procedure that was really not about it was about centralizing all that conflict management so people had a go-to person to help them. But it was also about giving tools and resources so they could work through informal resolution on their own, because that's how the college operates. We're people-led, and it's about building relationships. And so we want to let them practice those skills. The idea was always like, if someone came forward with a conflict directly to the president of a company that they worked at, that wouldn't be the most effective way to get anything resolved. Yeah. And that was really what was happening here. Yeah. And so let's model that and bring it back and say, okay, so how would you go about that? Who would you go to? Who might be the best fit to go to? How do we get this resolved as quickly as possible? It might not be sending 5 emails. It might be sending 1, but to the right person, right? Yeah. And so how can we step back, pause for a moment, and think about how we write it, who we write it to, those types of things, and walk them and coach them through those steps. So it became much more of that coaching, and now we can narrow that because of all these other additional resources that are advising and doing these other pieces. We can really focus now on harassment discrimination cases, which require a more specialized focus and approach and a longer term case management, I would say. We can focus on things like disruptive behaviors in the classroom and addressing some of those, and not necessarily having to deal with all those other types of conflicts, because we're all spreading those skills and sharing that load across the college now.
Yeah. So what does that look like in a college with such massive diversity, different perspectives, different approaches, different, even value systems in the way that they deal with that? Like that's not an easy feat here.
It's funny because when we first started the research and development part, one of the first things we did was, what are our values? And we went to that because at that time it was so diverse, and we're spread across all these campuses, and we have totally different demographics of students, from mature students to straight out of high school to coming from rural versus local, right? Not living in residence, living in residence. There were so many differences happening, and now that's even flourished more. And so watching and navigating the conflicts that happen just because of the pure dynamics of numbers and shifts in what was the difference people were noticing and feeling. Yeah. And they were being exposed to certain differences for the first time that they haven't. Yeah. And that can be a shock to the system. That's right. Which then changes the nervous system. Okay. And then when the nervous system activates, we see it in our office. Okay. So COVID's a great example of that in the pandemic. The amount of escalated, urgent type matters that came to our office, significant, like right away. It wasn't just we got more volume of things. It was the urgency of it. And what that tells me is that everybody's body state was somewhere else, right? And so it was learning how to navigate the nervous system more than it was about learning how to navigate people and the differences.
Yeah. And you know what just kind of blew me away here, Laura, is you're thinking about, I feel like, a collective nervous system as opposed, I'm getting goosebumps, sorry, but as opposed to that individual, because I always think about it from that individual perspective, and you're looking at it from such a broader, that.
It goes back to my education, right? Of that idea of integrating the individual and the macro and the all at the same time. But that collective energy, that culture, people know it. I just got goosebumps too. People know it. They feel it, right? You go, "What? I missed that. I missed in COVID not being on campus because there's an energy." And that's really what the nervous system is. It's energy and motion, right? And so when we're in the classroom and we're transforming and we're learning and we're growing, there's energy. And people were getting frustrated looking at black screens because how can I get that energy, right? And so it was less about that individual not attending class than it was about what collectively is happening right now that we need to pause and go. Because our response was to the individual, not to the collective. And so we had to kind of navigate that of what you're responding to right now actually is something bigger than this one student. How can we make sure that's addressed in the way you're communicating with this student or that student's communicating with another student or so on? There was a lot more happening than what people thought.
I think you're seeing a lot of this from the student perspective, right? And I wonder, in what ways are you able to help and support the faculty on the other end, right? Because they're, in their own classroom, in their own world, sort of trying to, as we go back and think about the pandemic and all of that stuff, so that's another layer of complexity there too, right?
What was interesting was we created it as a student service, but I would say 50% of the time I'm interacting with employees.
I see.
And so I love that. I love I love seeing it from both perspectives.
Right.
And so we have evolved to be more of coaching. Actually, most of our resources we've created were for employees because those are the people the students are looking for, especially now as we move into a newcomer type demographic of they're new to Canada, they're new to the system, they're new to our education. They're looking to other people for advice. They also come typically from communal backgrounds, which means they're turning to other people for that support. So we need to be prepared to provide that support in some way. They're also looking to their elders as the wise ones. And so how special is that?
No, for sure.
To be the wise one and somebody that they're looking
in
to
their life,
with, And we don't realize that. We realize that maybe in a teaching role, there's a power dynamic there. We don't always see that in the admin side of the role. And so walking people through what does that look like to be that person? What wisdom do you carry? What do you not feel comfortable or confident in? How can you either build those skills or be clear that that's not your area of expertise? Because that's okay too. And I remember hearing President Tibbet say that when I would facilitate orientations, and he would speak to the students. And one of the things that he would share to the family and friends was, it's okay to say, I don't know. I surround myself with people who don't act like they know things. I either want you to know something or go out and learn it or direct me to the person who might, right? But I don't pretend you don't know what you don't know. And I think there's a lot of wisdom there. And so there's just some cool stuff that can happen when working with employees. And so we, end up coaching, providing resources. We do workshops for employees. I have one next week on getting to know student rights and responsibilities. Typically, they're the ones setting expectations with students. Yeah. So we give them kind of the framework and boundaries around what are those? Yeah. What are some expectations you can bring forward? What would that look like? Let's talk through what would that look like in your specific situation. Right. The more clear and specific we can be, the easier it is to maintain and hold those expectations.
Yeah. So while your office is student rights and responsibilities, I wonder if you're really more of the emphasis on the college's environment as rights and responsibilities, right?
100%. We talk about it as student rights and responsibilities isn't owned by us. It was literally built by all those consultations with stakeholders. And the idea is we all uphold and maintain that. And it acts like an umbrella for how we operate as a culture, that culture collective idea. And then we kind of work on anything that might be considered a violation, and specifically ones that are much harder to work on as a collective or need more dedicated time and approach. And so, yeah, that's very much how we approach it as a whole. And I would say a lot of time employees will come to us to be like, I want to make sure I know what the students' rights are because they want to respect the rights. Or I want to make sure I know the students' responsibilities because I'm not getting a sense that they're meeting those right now, but I don't know what to do about it. And so both sides of that, even though we see student rights as very much a student-based thing, employees also want to understand and navigate those things to, be in their caring approach in the way that they work with students. So it's been interesting as we watch it evolve because, again, it's been very process-based and it's been very much based on what resources are needing and emerging, COVID pandemic, our response to that, new policies creating, how can we get certain information to people quicker, and in ways that aren't necessarily policies, but that it's clear up front, around minors on campus, these types of things that come up on a regular basis. Where can I breastfeed?
Right.
Which has then led us into some really cool projects.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I get to work, you were talking about collective.
Yes.
And so I'm doing a lot of collective projects right now. So rather than working just with students on conflict day to day, working on how do we proactively address some of these concerns. So things like breastfeeding on campus, we created accommodation rooms that are able to help students with any type of needs that they have in the moment. So someone's having a panic attack. That was happening in the washrooms. Well, that's not the safest nor most comfortable place for that to happen, but they were just trying to find a spot out of the hallway, right, to have a moment. And so this is a room that can be used for that. It's a multi-purpose space for that pausing and that breathing and that overstimulation, again, looking at the nervous system. Or when babies are overstimulated and can't focus, and this is a space when we have a lot of energy on campus to kind of pull back and use. So that's something we got at every single campus. We looked at universal washrooms, mapping those out, making sure that those were accessible at each of our campuses.
Yeah.
I helped with that. Yes.
The period stuff.
Yes.
The menstrual products in the bathrooms.
We just started Menstrual Equity Initiative this year in May. And so I was brought on for a project lead of that. And so again, because I have a pulse and I have these connections across the college, and I work in student affairs, but also with employees, I'm able to navigate and do the communications and work with teams on getting information out about that, managing the timelines for those things, and just making sure the momentum keeps going for those equity type projects. So we now have period products available at all our campuses in all our washrooms, and we're continuing to evolve and work on that and build on education of menstrual equity. So it's beyond just the products providing them, but really instilling how do we break down the stigma that's attached to all of that. And we're doing some great stuff there. And I'm also working on a food security collective. So I chair the food security collective, where what we're realizing is 9 out of 10 of our students are food insecure, which is significantly higher than the average. And that's not surprising. That is seen in our communities. That's being felt elsewhere. We're just a microcosm of all of that. But how do we address that communally, collectively, share the load? What are we able to do? What can we enhance that we already have? And what needs to be added? So there's some really cool stuff coming from those conversations already.
Yeah. So that it's been very interesting. Like I like the way you talk about your career as being a process-based career, right? As you kind of evolve through these different needs of what's happening in the community itself, and then kind of responding to that, looking for those pockets, looking for those pieces, right?
One of the negatives of that can be that I'm being in a responsive mode constantly. And so that's something that I'm kind of navigating, is figuring out, like, as much as I'm doing some proactive things, it's in response to other things.
Yeah.
And so that can be tricky to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, so I was moving in a different direction, but that just brought up a new thought for me, because I'm hearing a lot about, work-life balance, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about that comment yet, because I feel like our lives are not separate pieces, right? Our lives are intertwined, and we have these deep connections, and we have these passions, and we have these goals, and we have these ambitions. So then, is there a possible to have that work? Like, what is work-life balance in that situation? And I'm hearing so many stories where people are talking about complex decisions in relation to families and goals and all these types of things. So what is this concept of work-life balance? But yet at the same time, we need boundaries, right? That's a healthy thing. So what does that look like for you?
It's a hard one. You talk about what my passions are. I'm passionate. I'm deeply connected to anything I do. And I hope that people see that when I talk about this. But I am one of those people that will give whatever energy I have capacity to. And so finding that balance has been difficult. I mean, during the pandemic, I also was on parental leave with my first child. So I've navigated being a mother, and what is it like? It made it really easy for me not to lose myself in motherhood, because I had a very strong passion, identity, and connection to the work I was doing. And so there is all these other elements of me that I can play with and be creative with. And so that was a nice balance in many ways. But there are pieces of that I have to root with my family, and I'm being responsible and accountable to how I raise my child. It's funny, a lot of the conflict management stuff comes in really handy as a parent too.
It does.
But it's just...
I forget how old is your little person?
He's going to be 4 in a week. Yeah.
I was going to say, especially conflict resolution with 3-year-olds. That's always a fun thing.
So it's like, it's been really complementary and integrated. Yes. So that balance has been there, but the time, the energy, those are the pieces that I'm still playing and toying with. And I had to take a leave at one point, medically wise. And so part of that was stepping back too and just going, I have to listen to my body. And so I bring my whole self to my work, which is great. I need to bring my whole awareness as well and look at all those aspects at play at one time and go, my heart is here, my mind is here, my soul is here, my energy is here. And what is my body saying as well right now? Yeah. And so if I can suggest that to anybody, like follow whatever, because eventually it will play out that way either way.
Yeah, our bodies are kind of incredible in the way that they tell us things about our stress level.
They're process-based too. And if something gets stuck in the process in your body, it can change the whole next year for you or, decades to undo what that is, right? And so we have to look inward when we're looking at our career management as well.
Yeah. I think that's a really important piece, and it actually kind of segues into some of the things around how do you make career decisions. It sounds like maybe you've had a few pivotal moments. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about and how they impacted your career. I don't know if you want to go down some of those pathways.
I've been part of some really transformative pieces. So I would say it was actually my volunteer work that informed a lot of my career path. So I did a lot of work in the sexual violence field. And what I was mainly doing was public education. And I could talk about something I'm passionate about for hours. And I found sexual violence was a topic not many people feel comfortable talking about. And yet I could sit there and facilitate conversations with people, and we'd open and we'd be honest and transparent, and then was able to move that from conversations to some really cool practices. So I got to be part of a co-pilot in the universities doing a theater production. That was like a 12-week process of building up and developing a project together. And we didn't know, again, where it was going to start, what was going to come from it. And it was conversation-led. And what that told me was the facilitation was my skill. It's my gift. I'm able to facilitate spaces, places, people, conversations, make connections, and do meaning making with people in ways that, I don't know how to teach it to anybody else. It's not something easy to teach. And so that's something that I've always held true to, is no matter what role I'm in. So even a financial advising type role, it was about facilitating. I'm a facilitator in your transition and next steps to the college. And so what does that look like? what do you need in order to be able to move to the next stage of this process? And providing options, but not just advising on options. It was more of just allowing them to feel whatever it was, the frustration of not having enough finances to be here, or the stress of building up enough finances to be here, or and giving them those resources. But no matter what, it's always come in handy and it's always showed up. I ended up working and going to high schools in that role and doing workshops on how to fill out OSAP and facilitating conversations about what are they struggling with before they even get here. And so it was always just showing up. And so facilitation, I know, no matter what role I'm going into, has to be there.
It's neat how you're thinking about that pivotal moment as being the development of a particular skill set that would take you in places that you didn't think about.
No.
Right?
Never would I have thought I would be in student conduct. Let's just say that. And I think most people who know me were like, what? Interesting.
Well, zoology to student conduct.
Behavior.
Yes, of course.
Of animals.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah. I see that connection. I really do. When you first introduced yourself, you introduced yourself with your name and your pronouns. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about how important that is to be able to have that expression of self in your workplace. I think that's how I want to frame that question.
So interesting. Mm-hmm. So I did my master's of education in teaching and learning, which I haven't really spoke about yet. And that was so impactful. And for a long time, people were encouraging me to go the social work route. And I just kept saying, it's something, again, listening to my body, something just didn't align there for me. But it was in being in education that really led me to doing a master's in education. And within that program, I was specifically looking at inclusive learning and what does universal design look like? What are those things? And in my thesis of it all, it was really about facilitating learning places, not just spaces, but anywhere can be a place of learning. It doesn't have to be in a classroom, for instance, and facilitating those for intentional belonging. And I created this whole cog system, but one of the cogs is actually applying yourself in the matrix. And so this idea that we can do community building, we can talk about theories, but if we don't apply ourself into it, then how intentional can it be? How much can belonging happen? Because that requires the addition of the self. And so that's the professional aspects, the personal aspects of self. So it takes you knowing yourself, knowing those pieces about you, knowing how I identify, what I choose to be. But it also, in order to create belonging with other people, we're social beings. And so to better understand them, to be able to relate to them, I have to understand those things about them and encourage and invite those things in. And one way to invite those things in is by modeling it myself. Again, if you look at 3-year-old toddler situations, again, everything you learned in kindergarten, some might say. But that idea is they're not going to follow what you say. They're going to follow what you do. And so this idea of I'll say it, it doesn't need to be a whole pronounced thing. It doesn't need to be an entire conversation. But me bringing it up and introducing it shows that I think about it, shows that I embody those things, welcomes others to do the same. It is something about just embodying all aspects of who I am and the intersectionality of who I am, which I think is really important because it's our layers together that speak to oppressions, privileges, all of these different things, which again, in my world, I navigate on a day-to-day basis with conflict in a very real way.
Yeah. Pragmatic, meaningful.
Yeah. And it comes up too in the courses I teach. So I also teach part-time in addition to all of this, and specifically right now in the social service worker program. And what I've been teaching is decolonizing practices and transformative practices, both which heavily address privilege, oppression, anti-racism, intersectionality, identity. And so if I'm teaching, again, I need to be living those practices on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. So how can workplaces help make it? Like, how can we, I wonder if I still feel like we're 2024, right? And there's still feels like there's an adoption level that is challenged by this idea that that we are layered, complex people. This seems absurd for me to say that, right? We're challenged by this idea that we're layered, complex people with, like you said, significant levels of intersectionality. I think that you move through these, right? Because I'm kind of looking at things from a little bit more of a mature lens. I've seen me move myself from these different complexities.
Yes.
How can we help people see that this is the simplest, in my opinion, it's the simplest gesture of respect and kindness, just to simply say, what pronouns would you like me to use? Such a redundant question, but yet such a...
Well, like you said, things evolve over time. So the more we do it, the more likely it'll just be imprinted regardless. Or we keep doing it regardless of that pushback. And there's something about that, of the pushing through without and despite. All of that can happen too. But there's the inviting in, the calling in. Curiosity and creativity are like number one. Those things had to show up in any job I go into as well, but they automatically show up in just the way I live my life. And I think, so getting curious with somebody and being like, what's going on for you? I notice, like, noticing is really key. I notice a discomfort in your body when I say that. Like, is there something going on there, or what comes up for you? Or I used to feel that way too, right? Or it wasn't until 2 years ago when I started doing this. I wonder why that was. And you getting curious with yourself and modeling that out loud verbally with them may allow them to then mimic that in their own processes. So leading and facilitating through it, and not relying on perfect expectations. Again, decolonization work will tell you that perfection is one of the hindrances of our colonized selves. And so this idea of we're not perfect, we're not here to produce the right thing, right? Again, my life isn't so much about the outputs as it is about the process, right? And so what does that look like? And how could you practice this in ways that maybe build that comfort? Similar to some people laugh in the mirror because they're not feeling like laughing, right? But literally laughing creates this sense in your brain that says, hey, it's okay to laugh, or I'm feeling happy when I laugh, so maybe I'm more likely to laugh next time. That same thing can happen with language, and language is going to evolve. So perfection isn't the goal, because we don't even know what it's going to be next year, right, in regards to that. But what are some easy replacements? It's habit replacing more than anything else, I would say. So when you look at their habits in their life, what's another word that does feel more comfortable to you? If you really need it to feel natural, or else it's not helpful anyways in many ways. Yeah. So is folks, is friends, is what's the replacement word for the hey guys? That is my regular go-to, right? Yeah. So it gets me thinking about a time when I was walking through the hall and I said, hi, how are you? And they said, good. And I kept walking. And it was with students and so on. And I felt so bad after. And that wasn't a one-off situation, but I just remember constantly thinking, I don't even have time to stop and say hi and actually hear the answer. And so what I flipped it to was, I don't have time. So that's not the thing. In that moment, I didn't have time. So that wasn't the answer. But what the answer was acknowledging their presence, which is really what I wanted to do at the root of it all. Yeah. So I flipped that to say, hi, it's really nice to see you.
Oh, I love that.
It doesn't require a response, but it's felt. Yes. And it's a simple sentence and it feels natural to me, and it's just as quick, right? So it's that kind of, what can you do that, and thinking it through that way, that might feel more comfortable.
Ooh, can I do that when I go back to Penn?
Please do.
So that's going to be so fun. So let's shift back to career. Okay. And let's think about, a student kind of going into, because we have similar programs. We have social service worker, we have similar programs. Let's think about, what would you advise a student who's looking at this field, this people human services field? And what would you advise them to do?
I think the first thing is, don't pigeonhole yourself.
Okay.
Because you might limit what actually you're capable of.
Right.
Or limit based on what you think is prescribed as the go-to. So did I think I'd be in conduct? No. Did I think of conduct as a community practice? Not necessarily. And yet much of what we've talked about today is community collective-based learning and experience. So there's something interesting to just getting to know other people. As I would say, spread your network is a huge gift to all of this. None of this would have happened if I didn't just talk about what I was passionate about or ask the questions and get curious and say, hey, I'm wondering what Respect Campaign can be next. And I had that conversation with so many people that then they were having conversations. And then that conversation led to a job that wasn't a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So talk about what you're passionate about with everybody,
right.
with the people in your community circles, with your friends, with your family, because they might know someone who knows somebody. And it's not just about making your network bigger. It's about you're putting that literal energy out there and that passion. And it can literally create things, which is pretty cool. So that would be the starting point, is don't get too narrow on a job or a field. One of the things I did was explore the book, What Color is Your Parachute?
Good one. It's an old one too.
Yes, it is
I think
old.
it's still in publication, but
it evolves.
It does evolve.
So it changes they update it every couple of years.
I was going to say, I think it's still in publication.
The version I have is older.
I'm pretty sure mine was from like the 80s.
Yeah. And they have it for retirement, a whole bunch of things,
Brilliant.
But it's still going. But that flower exercise stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, I did that 10 years ago, and I did it again in the last year to check in as a 10-year kind of just pivotal.
Yes.
Where am I now as a mom?
Yes.
As, somebody who's been in this field for a while? What does this look like? And what it does is it doesn't ask you at all what field or what job. It doesn't get you to go for the search function of here's the name, here's the organization I want to work for. It starts back at who are the people you want to work with? What are your transferable skills and knowledge? What are you bringing? Because again, facilitation for me, right? That could be applied in a million different ways. And so rather than saying, well, I like helping people, so I'm going to be a counselor. Well, what are other ways you can facilitate conversation? And so that exercise, if I can give any advice, helped me really figure out my environment, my skills, and the type of people I wanted to work with and be. And gave me those boundaries so that when I was in that ominous field of looking for any job possible, it really helped me filter in a really quick way of this is the person I want to be and I am. So what aligns with this?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then, it's not a consideration.
Yeah. Beautiful advice. So I'm going to sum it up with think about possibilities and explore the flower activity.
Yes.
I have one final question, and that is, what's next? What's next?
Well, I always love learning. So last year, my focus was really doing a lot of deep diving into anti-racism work and better understanding those practices and wanting to apply those now in a lot of the collective work I'm doing and so on. So bringing those with me wherever I go. I'd like to really explore. I've always wanted to be certified as a coach.
Okay.
I think it'd be really helpful in the roles that I'm doing and where I'm going.
Yep.
I'm taking. So you can tell me all about it.
We'll share.
Great.
I just signed up, or I'm starting the University of British Columbia organizational coaching, which gets you the ICF accreditation.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so
I've taken courses on coaching, but to really be immersed in a program and learn about the frameworks is something I'm really excited about and know I can apply no matter where I go next. And so it's really building on these collective projects that are happening and watching them evolve and seeing where those emerge and where I'm called to next. And then doing a bit more in the coaching and facilitating and working more in the education field and seeing what happens.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a brilliant conversation.
That's how I like to live life, with brilliance. It's awesome.
Wow, what a great conversation. Thank you for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Careers. If you liked this episode and want to hear more, follow us on Spotify and subscribe on YouTube. See you in the next one.